either there should be talks.
No,
because these transgressions, Mr. Leung, are a violation of the written agreement that we are having talks based upon an agreement that we will not violate the line of actual control while we have the talks, Mr. Leung. Brigadier Mahalingam also wants to come in. Andrew K.P. Leung, Brigadier Mahalingam, defense analyst, wants to make a point to you from our studios in Delhi. Go ahead.
First of all, Mr. Leung says that the line of actual control is disputed. It is a line. And I cannot understand, today in the newspapers it says that the intrusion has taken place anything between 10 and 18 kilometers. That means, is that line so very thick that they can violate it by 10 to 18 kilometers? Number one. Secondly, he says this dispute is to be settled. The Chinese president recently has gone on record to say that this is going to take a long time. I would like to ask why? Why should it take us such a long time? Thirdly, as rightly pointed out by Maruf Raja, the question of exchanging the exact location of the LAC as per each other's perception was to take place, and this was skirted by the Chinese. And lastly but not the least, the special representative who was sort of put in place to go into the details of the border dispute, their role has been diluted and they have been told to look into the entire matter of India-Chinese relations. Therefore, I am doubting whether the Chinese are really interested in sorting out this problem now, or they want to delay it till further and keep it as a needle to keep pricking as and when they want. Lastly, I also would like to mention that what has happened now, what has happened, it is they have disputed the status quo of the situation which has been there
exactly in a deliberate and well thought manner, by land, by sea and by air.
It is a clear, militarily it is a clear action by the some military commander to go in and recce the area, number one. See,
push the boundary.
Whom he had ordered to go and put his tents at a particular place, whether he is in place or not, and to see if there is any Indian build-up on the other side. These are all well orchestrated.
Alka Acharya disagrees. Alka Acharya disagrees. Alka Acharya disagrees with the majority view that this could not have happened without the political leaderships.
This is not.
Without the political leaderships. Go ahead. Yes,
no,
Dr. Acharya.
Mr. Goswami, the problem is that you bring me in here and you have 5 people who are making a huge point very loudly, and that is the majority view, and therefore that prevails. I don't understand. I mean, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a situation that has arisen between 2 countries who are attempting to sort out one of the longest and the most complex borders in the world? Are we now looking at the process that these 2 countries have been engaged in ever since 1993, when the first major agreement was signed, 1996, 2003, 2005. These are all landmark events between 2 countries who have fought a war and who are trying to now sort out the problem from a very different perspective.
We are talking about what happened on the 15th of April.
Just hang on.
We're talking about what happened on the 15th of April.
Mr. Goswami, let me just... What happened on the 15th of April cannot be seen in isolation from the current situation, which is that we do not have an mutually accepted line of control. So this problem in 15th of April, as with many others before it, is inherent in the nature of the situation that exists on the ground today. And a line does not mean that...
Miss Acharya.
No, it's not acceptable.
No, Miss Acharya.
Miss Acharya, a line does not mean that you can just cross it at... It's not
Miss Acharya. Miss Acharya.
What we have is a map on which...
Miss Acharya, with all respect, obviously there is a context, and I can equally argue that since April, if I look at the latest statistics of April 2013, there have been 600 border violations by China along the LOC since 2010. I'm not even getting into that. I am simply talking today, the simple question this entire country is asking. The suddenness and nature of the Chinese operation. They enter the Pangong Lake, I have 20 boats go in, they do a detailed recce on the Indian side, their helicopters come in, they provide air cover, and immediately their platoon moves in, pitches their tents, supply lines are opened up, and then they refuse to talk. to the Indians. That's the situation. Now, 20 years of talking, 20 years of talking, Ms. Acharya will not negate that fact.
As I said right at the beginning, as I said right at the beginning, that this is a unprecedented situation, and therefore the two governments have got into action. I mean, at least I see a process at work, and I do believe that diplomatic process should be given precedence before we move on to other kind of possibilities.
No, nobody's talking about other possibility. We are talking about the gravity of the situation, Seshadri Chari.
Of course you are.
We are talking about the gravity of the situation.
I think it is very necessary to understand the gravity of the situation.
Means that you do
this is not a surprise move, and this is neither a surprise move,
but the point
nor
is that we have a range of options.
No, this is not a surprise move, and this is not something that has to be seen in isolation. It's very correct, as Ms. Alka Acharya says, it is not to be seen in isolation, because this is not an incident that has happened just yesterday. This is part of a very long strategy, because this decision is not a local decision. This decision has been taken by the highest authority, that is the Central Military Commission. And listen, the Central Military Commission, which comes under PLA, is under the President. The party is under the President of China. The government is under the President of China. And therefore, it directly goes to the President of China, who has very recently met our Prime Minister. And this is always a strategy on the part of the Chinese, just as they did in 1959, and then they took over part of Tibet. And then in 1962 they mounted an aggression in a similar fashion without firing even a bullet. If they can easily intrude into India and put you on a totally defensive position with absolutely no options, I think this is a situation that they have created for us, and therefore we have to look for a way out of this situation. There cannot be a normalization of relations on the basis of what China has done.
No, right now, Mr. Chari,
the gravity of the situation.
The gravity of the situation is immense. However, right now, Mr. Chari, New Delhi seems to be completely confused. They want the media to look the other way. They literally would not want the media to report the facts on the ground. But why should we not dismiss this intrusion? Andrew K.P. Leung, Maruf knows better, as do Brigadier Ramalingam, the strategic dimension. The fact is, this intrusion, Maruf, has taken place at Daulat Beg Oldi, where India established a landing strip during the 1962 war. Can you tell our viewers, Maruf, why the area where the Chinese intruded is so significant that if there was to be a confrontation tomorrow, if we lose this area, we'll be at a huge disadvantage?
Well, Arnab, there are several advantages that area offers. I mean, please also remember that apart from India having established an airstrip in Daulat Beg Oldi in the 60s, India has reactivated that as one of the airfields which looks towards the China-Tibet front. So Daulat Beg Oldi is one of those airfields that the Indian Air Force has activated about a year and a half ago. But more importantly, China is looking at conveying the following messages. Firstly, it can intrude and Delhi wouldn't respond, and if Delhi doesn't respond, this has been Chinese strategy all over the world to acquire territory and then eventually claim it as a part of its claim line. Let me also draw an analogy, as Mr. Seshadri Chari has said, not just with 62, but more with the Kargil conflict, where the Pakistanis intruded in the hope of challenging the LAC and the LOC. And the last point I wish to make is that please read a recent cover story in The Economist, where it feels that India's political leadership lacks the strategic vision to take India into the great power status, because we continue to harp on old and tired lines of diplomacy. With due respects to Ms. Alka Acharya, whose knowledge of Sino-Indian relations is perhaps much greater than mine, but let me just question one of her claims that we've had landmark agreements with China. What have those landmark agreements led to? That China doesn't even recognize the maps that we are putting forward, and we are calling them landmark agreements. We are talking about it being a tactical move by some Chinese troops. If it's a tactical move, let us deal with it at the tactical level. Get the military commander on the spot, the brigade commander, and tell him you've got 48 hours to kick those guys out. If you want to deal with it at diplomatic level, then let's raise it between Delhi and Beijing. What we are doing is, remember, China went into Vietnam in 1979 to teach them a lesson, and China learnt many lessons themselves. It's about time China learns a lesson that you cannot keep
China had no answers.
Indian territory.
And China had no answers.
Will passively look on.
And China had no answers when Vietnam stared it back. The fact is, Andrew K.P. Leung, India, a large part of the Indian establishment has understood the Chinese game. My question to you is, if tomorrow clearly the Chinese are told, move out, don't compromise the peace that exists between us. Are you saying that it is your assessment that the Chinese will tell the Indians, we will stay, whatever the cost? Is that the Chinese point of view?
No, I don't think that. Well, I think that's the very point. There is a lack of trust in India of China's intentions. And you've got to understand what China really wants. There is no point for China to have a very confrontational international environment, because this would impinge upon the internal situation in China, the stability of the China's economy, for example. So China wants basically largely a peaceful kind of environment. But on the other hand, China is very sensitive about its territorial integrity or territorial claims. So I think that because these kind of conflicts, that's not the first time. It's going to be repeated forever and forever until you come up with a grand settlement. So what I was suggesting in the beginning is that they're taking advantage of this new leadership in China, and then both sides would come to the table and negotiate a final settlement, not only the territorial disputes in that particular area, but also in, for example, in the in other large areas between China and India.
Seshadri wants to say something.
Let me make one very important point.
Okay, let him make a point.
Which is that if you look at China, the most important thing is not India. The most important thing for China is the kind of a kind of rivalry between a rising power, China, and the United States. And then a lot of the problems have arisen since the American pivot to Asia. So I think that China is extremely worried about that, because that would impact on the security of China's energy transportation around the South China Sea and so on, and through the Indian Ocean.
No, but
that's why you got to understand what China wants. It's the national security, and of which the Indian side of the issue is only part of the problem.
Mr. Leung, I understand it's a complicated global environment, and you have your global aspirations. But then, for God's sake, Mr. Leung, why do you have to make 50 of your soldiers enter 10 kilometers across the LAC, pitch a tent, fly your helicopters, and also send your night patrols into our side of the Pangong Lake? You don't have to do that. You also have a lot at stake. Brigadier Mahalingam wants to say something to you. Brigadier Mahalingam, 1 second.
Arnab, in this process, we are camouflaging the intentions of the Chinese. We must understand the geography of the area. If you look at the area, immediately to the northwest is the Sasgam Valley, which has been given to the Chinese by the Pakistanis. Now there the Chinese workforce is working there, and if my assessment goes correct, they are building a road which will link the port, Gwadar port. The point that is happening is the Chinese interest in that area is growing. Therefore, we have to see the POK aspect of it. The China, by investing its money in that area, is trying to become a third claimant as far as the dispute between India and Pakistan is concerned.
The short point is...
We have to read this very clearly.
The short point, Seshadri Chari, let me get you in. Short point is, we cannot afford to just sit back now anymore. We have to have an aggressive strategy vis-a-vis the Chinese.
No, the most important element here is this whole area should be reverted back to the Indian Army, and or the ITBP could be probably be, like the Kargil report very rightly mentioned, should be brought under the Army, number one. Number two, we will have to put a border security management architecture into place, and there should be coordination between the MOD and all other units as far as this areas are concerned. Unfortunately, we don't have a border security management policy at all. Even after 62 till 2013, we have not been able to put in place a strong policy mechanism, and this policy mechanism should be directly dealt with by the MOD.
Yes.
And it should also include certain think tanks and experts who are not part of the government, but who are readily available to the government of India to give all kinds of advice on these matters.
No, I totally agree with you,
this government
just
on very serious.
As I thank all my guests, just a cautionary note, another point also to the Ministry of External Affairs. Today there was a press conference at the Ministry of External Affairs, so the most surprising and shocking fact was that the ministry spokesperson was very happy to take an endless number of questions about the foreign minister's visit to Moscow, but seemed cagey, deflecting and unsure for a very long time while taking questions on China. I think the Ministry of External Affairs should adopt greater transparency, honesty and directness when it deals with journalists on such an important issue. That's to the MEA spokesperson. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for talking about that very important and worrying development on our first Newhsour debate. Thank you.